Yeah, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to share my story. Yeah, and hopefully that through my journey, you'll be encouraged to see how even in the midst of suffering, ongoing suffering, that God is present, that He is working for His glory and for our good. So there's no testimony without a test, right? Yeah, so I wanted to highlight the test. Next slide. So when somebody asks you how you became a Christian, you begin with, now this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down, and I'd like to take a moment, just stand right here and tell you how I became a prince of a kingdom called heaven. Ahoy! Thank you. I told my wife I was going to do this, and she was like, no! Yeah, the first, when Pastor Sean asked me to share my testimony with you guys, the first question I asked him was, how much should I share? Because as my wife likes to put it, Dae has done everything and experienced everything, like almost everything except for murdering somebody. So yeah, I would love to share a lot of the interesting parts of my faith and journey of life, but we will save that for a private conversation and some coffee. What we can do is peel and examine actually a layer of the many different layers that make up my life called quote unquote crazy days, which is a story that it shares a brokenness, questions, and yes, lots and lots of struggles, or what I like to call beautiful struggles. But through it all, God is able to let His glory shine. Anyways, next slide. The passage that we observed together reminds us that Paul, while suffering in prison, saw that even his suffering served a purpose to advance the gospel and to show God's glory. And this is what I want all of us to focus on and to reflect on, how suffering, even if it's ongoing and difficult, can actually be used by God to display His glory, to shape us, and to give Christ to others, bringing much needed hope. So now we have that all established. I have a quick question to ask everyone. Have you guys ever heard of the saying, blind leading the blind? Yes, okay, I see some nods. Well, in the world, that is a very negative connotation, meaning that somebody who is lost is leading others that are lost, just as lost, right? However, in God's world, that's actually something that is possible. But because the Bible says, for we live by faith and not by good. You guys are good. Okay, thank you. Appreciate your participation. So my story, we begin my story with that. Next slide. This is my family. And my father, after graduating high school, joined the Korean Army as his mandatory. And during one of the training sessions with the U.S. Army folks, he had an accident where a pressure gauge for a missile exploded. And glass shards ripped into my dad's face, causing him to lose his right eye and to nearly bleed to death. He was airlifted to a hospital and went through intensive surgery where he was able to retain his eyesight on the left. But over time, despite having multiple surgeries, his sight vanished and he was deemed visually impaired. In other words, officially blind. I didn't think it was going to be this emotional. All right. I can't imagine the things my dad went through. Suddenly one day you're not able to see anymore. Yeah. My dad struggled a lot to accept this reality. And I can't give you all the details because this is not my story to tell. But I'm sure that it is an ongoing fight. Okay, I'm back. But thankfully, here's where God's hand begins to shine. My mom had already met my dad in high school. Even after the accident, she chose to marry him. And that in itself is one of the most beautiful love stories that I know. And not only that, thanks to my mom, we were a church-going family while we were still living in Korea. My family and I moved to Los Angeles, if you don't know, when I was in third grade. And like many immigrant families, we found a local community at a local Korean church to help us settle down. And thanks to that, my family, mainly my parents, started to take their faith a little more seriously. I didn't find out this until I was in my 20s, but my dad once shared with me that the decision to move our family to America after it came after he was prayed by a blind pastor. Ironic, right? And during that prayer, the pastor encouraged him to take the family to the U.S., not only for a better life, but also for him to be cared for, to receive better care for his condition. My dad said the moment reminded him of Abraham, leaving his home country and stepping out in faith, trusting that God will lead the way. And when I was in sixth grade, my dad became a pastor. He started serving at a pretty large Korean church. He was leading a ministry for the visually impaired. I was able to meet Jesus personally as I literally saw blind leading the blind. And I saw the light of Jesus radiate through my dad. This was one of my earliest and something that I could really fall back on. This is a constant reminder that God is real. I wish I could say that witnessing God work miracles and getting to know Jesus at an early age kept me on the straight and narrow. However, I struggled a lot while I was growing up. I was trying to assimilate and survive in a very foreign culture, but also had to become the bridge for my parents in anything English related. I'm sure some of you guys could relate. I didn't know at the time, but I think there was a lot of hidden anger. I mean, don't get me wrong. I knew that God had given me the best father that I could ever ask for. And to me, he's like a superhero. The way he could navigate through the many different obstacles in my house, right? Or he has this heightened sense of hearing and smell. I could never get a jump on him. You know, I try to scare him a lot, and he'd just be like, Dae, I know you're there. Right? And he would often know how I'm feeling by the sound of my voice, no matter how much I tried to hide it. And because of all of that, I call him my own personal daredevil. And I have a nickname for him, and I call him Blind Fury. If you could tell, Blind Fury. Yeah. As a teenager trying to figure things out, I often wrestle with a deep sense of frustration and loneliness, like I had to navigate everything on my own. My dad shared a lot of wisdom with me, but sometimes I felt like my dad was just, yelling out instructions from a distance with no hands-on guidance. It felt like being trained by Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. It's like, what does that mean, Dad? Like, I don't understand, right? You guys get that reference, I'm glad. But in all seriousness, this is the part where I'm not so proud of. I wish I can share more about this layer of my life, but it feels like I'm going a little off tangent, so I'll mention briefly. I will save the details for next time. Anyways, despite growing up witnessing God at work, I experienced deep valleys and being in spiritual wilderness in my late high school years into my early 20s, mid-early 20s. I struggled with my identity and with addictions, and I wandered far from God. Like the prodigal son, I chased pleasure and got entangled in sin. I smiled a lot, but I also carried a lot of hidden pain. And you know what they say, those with the biggest smiles are the ones that are the most hurt inside. Of course, some wounds were self-inflicted due to my curiosity and rebellion, and others were deeply rooted in confusion and loneliness. It took much time being broken while praying with tears, but thankfully, with the steadfast love of God, as well as my parents, I was able to slowly turn away from my sins and come to a place where I'm today. Okay, going back. One dream I always held onto was this: to get married early and to have a son, to play catch or to shoot hoops with, to play video games, to give him all the things that I didn't have while I was growing up. Since my dad couldn't do certain things with me while I was growing up, I longed to reverse this narrative and give my son a normal life. After meeting my wife, by the way, my wife is back there. Say hi, Miyuki. After meeting my wife and getting married, I was very excited to hear the news that we were having our first child. And it was a son. A dream come true. Hallelujah, right? However, as I have mentioned before many times while I was up before you guys, Hunter has a rare condition called Williams syndrome, which causes a delay in his overall development. It causes delay in his physical development, causing his muscles to be very thin and weak, which affects his motor skills. It also causes delay in his cognitive functions and makes communication much, much harder. And if I'm being honest, I would say that there is a moment where my dream broke apart. I remember asking the question of why. Like, why God? Why am I sandwiched between these two generations of disabled family members? First my dad, and now my son. Like, why? You know? And it wasn't just a moment of suffering. It was an ongoing reality, a new chapter of unknowns. And truth be told, it hurt a lot. But through lots and lots of prayers and lots of inner struggle, I laid all of that down before the Lord's feet because the Lord reminded me to focus on the joy of having a child, because every child is a blessing from the Lord. And indeed, Christ had begun to mold and shape me as I have learned so much being a father, especially about the father's heart and understanding a bit deeper on what God had to give up for us. In many ways, in the middle of our weakness, God started to reveal his strength. And now that my wife and I found out the cause of Hunter's developmental delay, we were for the most part relieved and were focused on helping him. And the Lord definitely did his part of encouraging us. He met us where we were. Before learning about the cause of Hunter's developmental delay, we had to get a DNA test. Our family was basically living on part-time wages at the time, and the cost of the DNA test was as much as my monthly salary. Not knowing how I'm going to pay it off, I had to just swipe my card with faith, trusting that God would intervene like he has done in numerous occasions. And surely enough, after an hour, I got a notification on my phone. It said some money was deposited. I was like, what? Right? I checked my phone and it said my tax return had come back in. And it was enough to cover the DNA cost. A cost of the DNA, and also to cover a meal for our family. God is abundant, right? And I remember one conversation with a missionary that after she heard about Hunter's diagnosis, she really encouraged us through this time of a conversation. She said, God gave you Hunter because he knew that you two would be the best parents for him. God knows what he's doing. That simple encouragement hits so deep, And throughout many moments when we're in the trenches, facing the hard reality of our situation, God would send us humbling yet very comforting reminders, like warm blankets from Jesus, often through the many people that are around us. Of course, raising a child with a disability is not an easy feat, and it's an ongoing battle day in and day out. I give so much credit to my wife, who often has to care for both Hunter and our 20-month-old daughter, Nara. By the way, Hunter, Nara is Kingdom of Heaven. They're such a handful, and the work of caring for them can be very exhausting. But at the same time, it's been very incredibly transformative for both of us. And it doesn't hurt that they're so cute, And again, whenever we grow weary, God gently reminds us, I see you, I'm with you, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And just the other day, the elder of Shin Church, who cleans up and closes the church after us, after our service, was riding the elevator with me. And he looked at me randomly and he's just like, brother, he gave you an angel. And I was like, what? Right? He had seen me with my wife and especially my kids because we would often stay after service to play in the second floor playroom. And I was like thinking to myself, man, like it's so true though, right? Hunter, although he may not have all the social cues and the understanding of personal boundaries, he doesn't pick and choose who he becomes friendly to. I am sure that some of you are very surprised by him when he just jumped into your personal bubble, started touching you and winking at you, trying to, get your attention, right? And his disability or special condition allows him to have unfiltered love for people. And you know what? It humbles me so much because sometimes it feels like that's more Christ-like than anything I've ever seen. And it's more Christ-like than even myself, Though he may be fussy and throw a fit when things don't go his way, he can be easily redirected. And he rebounds quick. And he could change from being angry and throwing a tantrum to being uplifted and joyful in a matter of a second. And he definitely does not keep a grudge or become bitter, which is definitely better than me. It makes me wonder sometimes who is the one with the disability? Him or me with all my pride, all my shame, and my judgment? It hasn't been always easy to see. But every now and then, Hunter reminds me of a deeper truth, that we all have this disability called sin. That on our own, we are helpless and unable to save ourselves. And that we need Jesus, who is the one who is able, the only one who is able to save. And truly, God is able to use all things. And yes, even our weaknesses and our sufferings for his glory and for the good of those who love him. I remember one day my dad and I were having a deep conversation about Hunter and his own experiences with his blindness. And he shared with me his testimony and shared how John 9 impacted him so much in his life. You guys know John 9? Question marks. Quiz time! Just kidding. The story, the John 9, that's the story where Jesus' disciples see a man that is blind from birth and ask him if the result of his blindness was his sins or his parents' sins, right? And in John 9, verse 3, it says, Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." And my dad said this verse gave him peace about his blindness as well as to reveal to him about the purpose. He was encouraged and like Jesus wanted to help open the eyes of the blind. And though he isn't able to be a miracle worker, he became a pastor who helps people to open their eyes spiritually. And he said that the same miracle could be applied for Hunter's life. And he's right. I definitely see the work of God being displayed in my son, and that continues to give me hope. I pray that Hunter grows into a man of wisdom, someone who deeply loves God and extends the love and comfort of Jesus to his neighbors. And not only that, I see God at work in my life and how he has changed me as a person, as a husband and a father. He is refining me to make me more compassionate, more patient, and more like Christ. And if I'm honest, I still have hard days. I struggle with envy, doubt, and fatigue. But I've seen how my story, even the painful parts, has given me opportunities to connect and share Jesus with others. You see, sometimes the brokenness we try to hide becomes the very light that shines the brightest. I've had people reach out to me in their own moments of despair, asking me how I have peace, how I still have joy. And that gives me the chance to point them to Jesus. And like Paul in prison, I can say that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Not because I planned it that way, but it's because God is that good. So we go back to the question, Can the blind lead the blind? In the world? Probably not. But in God's kingdom, absolutely. Because even if we cannot see the road ahead, we can walk by faith. And even if life doesn't look like the way we wanted, the story that we wanted, God is still writing something beautiful. Things are the way they are so that the work of God may be displayed in them. Allow me to finish with sharing one last Bible verse which has anchored me in my times of trouble. It comes from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 10, which says, "After you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you." I don't know what kind of season you're going through and what kind of sufferings or ongoing sufferings and happenings there are in your life. But I want to tell you that God sees you. Even when it's hard to lift your head, he is near. So I want to encourage you to keep looking to Jesus, who has taken on the greatest suffering and who knows exactly what you're going through. He knows what he's doing. He will work all things for the good because he is working continuously so that the power and glory may be revealed. The God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Jesus Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. And one day you will look back and see how his glory shone brightest in your weakness. He is using your story so that the love and grace that you receive will overflow onto many others, giving them Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. So I pray that you find hope in your suffering and strength in his grace. Thank you for listening. God bless you guys.